evening. And welcome to Q&A in the Sir John Clancy Auditorium at the University of New South Wales. I'm Tony Jones, answering your questions tonight. The co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Bill Gates. Please welcome our guest. Thank you. Well, because Mr Gates was only in Australia for 14 hours, tonight's program is the first ever pre-recorded Q&A. As usual, it's being simulcast on ABC News 24. And though we won't be able to answer your Twitter questions, we would like to see your Twitter comments published on the screen. So please join the Twitter conversation now with the Quanda hashtag. Well, Bill Gates is the world's most generous philanthropist. He made billions as the co-founder of Microsoft, the company which led the way in personal computing and changed the way that we all work and live. He's now, on and off, the world's richest man, and he's established the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation with the intention of giving away most of his wealth by targeting billions of dollars at health and education projects around the world. He's visiting Australia to convince Australians to continue and to expand our aid program. And he joins us tonight as a guest of the University of New South Wales and the Pacific Friends of the Global Fund. We have an audience here of 900 students, graduates and guests, and they've got a lot of questions, so let's get started. Our very first question tonight comes from Betty Zeng.
Hello, Mr. Gates. It's really exciting to meet you in person. My question is, so you mentioned that your friend Warren Buffett once gave you some really great advice on philanthropy. He said, don't just go for the really safe projects, take on the really tough problems. What would you say is your toughest project that you've faced in your foundation?
Yes, Warren is very clear that the role of philanthropy is to do very tough things. The easy things can be solved by government or others. And I'd say the most difficult thing we work on is improving the United States education system. You know, the idea of how do you measure teachers, how do you give them feedback, how do you help them develop, how do you make sure there's the right incentive system around that. Very little's been put into that, and yet if you could make the teachers significantly better, the impact on equality, the impact on where the country would go would be pretty phenomenal. So I'd say that's the toughest thing we work on, even tougher than inventing new vaccines.
Yeah, what would be the most ambitious program then? Because getting rid of the polio vaccine by 2018 is a pretty huge task.
Yeah, eradicating polio, I think we have very strong odds of succeeding on that. We're down to 3 countries. We've had very successful fundraising over the last several months, and it's $5.5 billion, but we're using new tactics. We've looked at where it's been challenging, and we have less than 300 cases and only 3 countries. So I'd rate our odds as pretty good.
We've actually got a question in the audience on this topic. It's from Gillian Thomas.
Mr. Gates, polio survivors need special services because of post-polio syndrome and polio's late effects. Countries rarely provide these services and survivors are ignored. In Australia, most of the 400,000 polio survivors are excluded from our new National Disability Insurance Scheme, and Polio Australia is without government funding. No one will celebrate polio's eradication more than polio survivors. However, even after eradication, there will still be millions of survivors worldwide requiring polio services for up to 80 years. What strategies will get governments to shoulder their responsibility and fund essential post-polio services?
Well, you're absolutely right that polio syndrome and challenges and all sorts of disabilities are very important issues. And particularly in these very poor countries, they are not given a lot of attention. I knew that when I held a girl named Hoshman, who was only 2 years old in India, who didn't really understand what it meant for her life, that she was paralyzed, that the likelihood of her having the full life that she deserved was not very good. Hopefully we can use this polio success to raise the visibility of the fact there's still people out there who need help. But first and foremost, we want to make sure that no one else has to go through that, and that's where we're very close, and it will free up a lot of money for other health activities.
Gillian, can I just come back to you for your response to that? I mean, I understand you are a polio survivor yourself. I must say I'm quite shocked to hear that you're not covered by the disability care scheme.
No, unfortunately, it's the age 65 cut-off that's going to exclude us, because the polio vaccines came out about getting on for 65 years ago. And I got polio 5 years too soon, unfortunately.
Is there a way of dealing with this issue? I mean, could you use the money you save once you eradicate the disease? I think you're talking about billions of dollars in savings. Could that be used to help the survivors who are living on?
Yeah, well, certainly, you know, the health funds are fungible, and so every country will look at what they're doing on disability and other things, and, you know, hopefully it keeps polio in the forefront.
Okay, we've got a video on another extremely difficult problem, on malaria. It comes from Irango Moses from the Oil Health Search Foundation in Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea.
For the last 20 years, we have been hearing that we will have a malaria vaccine within 5 years. Given that malaria has been driven from countries with good health services without the need for a vaccine, how much hope and effort should be placed on the development of a vaccine or new drugs rather than strengthening health services, especially when countries with a large malaria burden like Papua New Guinea have poor vaccine coverage rates and poor functioning health services?
Okay, Bill, we know you work with Oil Search in Papua New Guinea. The search for a vaccine is what this is about.
Well, in fact, there's very little money being spent on a malaria vaccine. It was mind-blowing to me that when our foundation gave $40 million for malaria vaccine research, we became the biggest funder in the world. And whenever you have a disease that at that time was killing 1 million children a year, now because of bed nets, we're down to more like 700,000. The idea that the world can't take even 10% of what it spends on, say, a baldness drug and put it towards a malaria vaccine seemed pretty stunning to me. And yet the people who suffer from malaria don't have a lot of money, and so their voice in the marketplace is very weak. So only through government research or foundations will we pull that money together. Now, I'm quite optimistic that we understand enough about malaria. We can do what are called challenge models that will eventually come up with one. And in parallel, though, we're also coming up with better drugs, and drugs that are far less expensive. There's a drug that's been worked on here in Australia that will be a single-dose drug. And so the compliance, the need to come back to the health service and take the multiple doses, the side effects will be eliminated. So a lot of the innovation lets you do delivery even in very tough places, where PNG is one of the toughest places to deliver health interventions.
Okay, we've got a lot of questions to get to. The next one comes from Charlotte Regan.
How justifiable do you think it was for the federal government to blame a lack of predicted revenue for delaying their anticipated increase in foreign aid?
Well, the key thing I see is the incredibly positive impact of foreign aid. If we look at how we're saving children's lives, getting reproductive health tools out to women where they choose to have less children voluntarily, improving seeds so that farmers can grow enough for their kids to eat, to have the nutrition to succeed at school. It's phenomenal. And yet, because these programs are far away, a lot of people don't recognize the impact of what even 0.5% can do. And so Australia is to be thanked for the fact that its aid budget has gone up. And in a sense, the sooner you get to 0.5%, the bigger impact you're going to have. So I was disappointed at the delay. But the trend is still pointing in the right direction.
We've heard your diplomatic answer to this a few times today, but I understand, in truth, you were pretty angry when you heard that Australia was shirking its promise to actually do this. Is that true?
No, I don't tend to get angry. I don't think that's very constructive. I think if people could all visit, it would make a difference. And that's why those who do get a chance need to come back and witness it and make people feel good about what's being done. Certainly the world economy is such that all these development budgets are under pressure. In fact, you know, the deficits and debt levels in other countries are very, very high, and yet some of them, like the UK, are continuing to make very significant increases, moving up, in their case, to 0.7%.
And it's always significant when someone of your stature comes to persuade our leaders behind closed doors. Now, you're known as a mathematical genius. Given Australia's electoral math, how important was it that you came to see Tony Abbott?
Well, I'm not a pollster, and I saw both parties at length today.
But we know you can add up, and so can most of the people in this room. And the strong likelihood is he'll be the Prime Minister by the end of this year. So I'm wondering, behind closed doors, did you get a commitment from him?
Well, I spoke as somebody with expertise. I'm not an Australian voter, so I don't get to ask for things. But these are things where I've taken, the money that I've earned and decided to get behind them. And so whenever you have a management mentality, hearing from a business type person why they think this is the very best way to spend money, I think, a little bit you realize, hey, it's not soft thinking. It's not just that these are sad causes, it's because of the real change.
And was he receptive to your arguments?
He couldn't have been nicer.
Yes, okay. He's a politician. The next question.
Well, I didn't ask him to write a check or anything.
Perhaps next time you could.
All right. Well, the government in power did announce today an extra $80 million for polio, which is absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Our next question comes from Dave Kennedy.
The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has given $18 million to the Kirby Institute, UNSW, to conduct HIV/AIDS research. Following on from that, Chuck Feeney's foundation gave $10 million to help build new facilities for the Kirby Institute, UNSW, to help do that research. Now, we are thrilled, I'm thrilled as an Australian, that the American billionaires are coming here and helping us with all of this medical research funds. It's very difficult here. Malaria, tuberculosis, HIV, but particularly for HIV/AIDS. And I appreciate that America and Australia have different traditions when it comes to philanthropy. Can you tell us how you and Melinda decided to give so much away to folks outside of your family, and why do it in your lifetimes and not in your last will and testament?
Well, Chuck Feeney, who you mentioned, is one of the great philanthropists of the age, and I encourage everybody to look at his example. He's pretty much given away 99% of his money to phenomenal things, and it's really a great example that both Melinda and I have learned from. When you're lucky enough to have substantial wealth, what are the possibilities? You can build a pyramid. You can have 400 people fan you. There's kind of a limit to consumption, and so then you have to say what do you feel? What are you affiliated to? What really counts for you? If you feel like you're a citizen of the world and you want to help all of humanity, then you think, where is the greatest injustice? And I think a mother having to bury a child or having that child have so much sickness that their brain never develops, so they can't learn, they can't contribute in any way. That was a tragedy that Melinda and I decided to learn about and see, were there some miracle interventions, sort of the equivalent of the microprocessor personal computer that could be created. And so in doing that, we fund scientists all over the world. In fact, this year, we'll fund here in Australia about $40 million of science for health and agriculture. And that's done strictly on whoever does the best work in the world is who is going to end up getting that money. And so it's a real testament to the quality of the science in Australia that a lot of that happens.
Bill, at the core of that question was another question, I think, and that is why Australian philanthropists aren't stepping up to the mark. 2 Americans named there. We don't hear a lot about Australian philanthropy. Are our billionaires too greedy?
Well, I don't think philanthropy should be promoted just to make people feel bad or anything. I think when people see examples and they see that it can be done well. And it's uncomfortable at first because it's different than making money. The business you make money in, you're good at. You understand the metrics. You've seen it at work. And so when you make the transition to start giving away, you feel, very naive. And of course, charity, it's very hard to get it right. I do think philanthropy all over the world is on the increase. I think that's true of all levels of wealth. I think the idea of people who do philanthropy getting together and talking about what we do well, what's gone wrong, I think there's some value to that. We've got a global group called the Giving Pledge that is now international. Andrew Forrest is a member of that. I think all of that will encourage more people to come in, but they should do it because they are passionate about something, because they want to be philanthropic. And I don't think you can take it with you, so what's the alternative?
Okay, let's move on. Our next question is from Grace Delfendale.
Hi, Mr. Gates. First off, it's a great privilege to be here, to be able to hear you talk today. My question is that recent quotes from Pope Francis has shown that he believes that the cult of money has made life a misery for millions of people, and that capitalism has created a tyranny. As a person who has benefited greatly from capitalism, but has also used this in so many fantastic ways, what would your response be to this?
Well, my response is that if you look at life over the last 200 years or 50 years or any reasonable period of time, life has improved incredibly. If you think about the treatment of women, if you think about the treatment of gay people, if you think about children dying, 200 years ago, 40% of all children died before the age of 5. People didn't have a chance to learn to be literate and to read books. Average lifespans were less than 40 years. And so in a span of not too much time, even compared to human history, we have made unbelievable progress. The things we take for granted, the ability to go out and learn things, to have air conditioning, to have clothing, to have a toilet, it's pretty phenomenal. So anybody who looks at what capitalism does and say, okay, it's been a net loss versus that life we had before, I think there's some loss of perspective there. I don't claim capitalism is perfect, but the era of time in terms of human rights and the quality of living, that's very clear. We should work to make it better, to deal with those imperfections. But no, capitalism, the broad system we're in, which is mixed capitalism government, has been a great blessing to humanity.
Okay, we've got a question on a different side of capitalism. This one's from Matthew Thomas.
After the recent global crackdown on tax minimization schemes used by Microsoft, Apple, and several other firms, will you change your current finance strategies and bring capital out of tax havens and back into the country to honestly pay your tax?
I hope I heard that.
I could repeat it for you.
Yeah, I'm one of those rare people who's actually for taxes. I paid over $6 billion in taxes in the United States gladly. I feel like the services I get from the government are extremely worthwhile. And all those tech companies, as far as I know, are absolutely following all the rules about taxation. They are also, fairly big taxpayers. So if somebody wants those companies to pay a higher percentage of profit in taxes, they should change the rules and make that happen. I think it's great that that debate's taking place, but it's not incumbent on those companies to take shareholder money and pay huge amounts that aren't required. You really need to have the rules say what the mechanism is if you want to make that a greater source of tax collection.
According to the Senate committee who are looking at this, and they accused Apple of being one of the biggest tax dodgers in American history. I mean, according to them, these tax minimization schemes are not ethical. They may be legal, but they're not ethical. And in Microsoft's case, they saved $4.5 billion over a couple of years of money they otherwise would have paid for taxes to pay for health and education and so on. Do you think that's justifiable?
I think in a system of laws, it's very important that if you follow the laws, that you don't have some other second standard. I mean, for somebody buying shares in a company, say Google or something like that, do you expect them to just go and write checks for tens of billions? I mean, the people who write tax laws are the ones who should decide what things are, and there shouldn't be some separate story about what's ethical as opposed to what's the law.
So it's okay to look for loopholes so you pay less tax if you're a big corporation. That's what they're being accused of.
Well, the idea that taxes that you do on income outside the United States, that's not a loophole. I mean, it's a well-known, it's a fact about the US tax system. It's actually fairly unusual that we actually compute your extraterritoriality tax and that at some point we say we'll tax it. The thing that's interesting is the European countries are going to look at this and realize that they don't even see the extraterritoriality piece of this thing. But this is not a morality play. This is about the laws. You know, if people want taxes at certain levels, great. Set them at those levels. Those companies, you know, will be glad to comply to any of those rules.
Okay, let's move on. You're watching a special edition of Q&A. We're talking to Bill Gates. The next question comes from Anthony Liang.
Hi, Bill. You named Susan Cain's The Power of Introverts as one of your favorite TED Talks. My question for you is, how have you managed to succeed in a predominantly extroverted world? And how can the education system, with its increasingly extroverted ideals, harness the positive features of the introverted personality?
Well, I think introverts can do quite well. I think that there's, you know, if you're clever, you can learn to get the benefits of being an introvert, which might be, say, being willing to go off for a few days and think about a tough problem, read everything you can, push yourself very hard to think out on the edge of that area. And then, if you come up with something, if you want to hire people, get them excited, build a company around that idea, you better learn what extroverts do. You better hire some extroverts, like Steve Ballmer, I would claim, is an extrovert, and tap into both sets of skills in order to have a company that thrives both as in deep thinking and building teams and going out into the world to sell those ideas.
We've got a related question. It comes from Alina Yang.
Mr. Gates, thank you for answering my question. You used to lack self-confidence and were socially awkward in your teenage years. How did you eventually find a solid self-identity and confidence within yourself? Did achieving financial security, success, and fame boost your self-confidence? What drives and motivates you to get up every morning? And more generally, how can the average person figure out their driving force and their inspiration and passion?
Well, I think having some self-confidence is different than finding your passion. From a young age, ideally, you'll have adults in your life, preferably your parents as part of that, some of your teachers, people around you who like you and they're behind you and they'll back you no matter what goes on. And that gives you enough confidence to go off on a quest. And during that quest, you try different things out. If you're lucky, when you're very young, you find something you're passionate about. I did when I was 13 years old. I found computers and software. It took me another 5 years to figure out that was my life's primary work. But that's a lucky thing. Other people, you know, get out into their 20s or even later before they find what they're passionate about. But proceeding with a certain set of self-confidence, that there are people who care for you, you care for them, that you succeed in their eyes by your how you treat them. I think that's pretty basic, and it gives you the platform on which to try out new things, to fail. You know, at first you're not going to succeed in various things. So self-confidence is primary, and then finding your passion is an adventure, a quest that may take time, and it may switch over the time of your life. But those deep relationships will let you pursue it with vigor.
I don't want to bring us down a peg or two, but is it true you spent 2 weeks working up the courage to invite a girl to the school prom?
I don't know how long it took me, but she did turn me down.
Okay, our next question is from Rita Dar.
Mr. Gates, affordability of medicine is one of the key issues facing many of the poorest people in societies across both the developing and the developed worlds. One of the catalysts is the long-term patents issued to pharmaceutical companies that at the end of the day operate for profit. As an astute businessman, an innovator, and a philanthropist, do you believe that such mechanisms are critical to drive innovation in the field of medicine? Or are they simply market-distorting mechanisms that help create monopolies? If patents are indeed necessary or indispensable, what needs to change in the system to make medicine accessible to those who need it the most?
Well, one of the amazing things that happens is that the pharmaceutical companies, as we're going to them and saying, hey, we need to help out those poorest in the world, they're willing to offer for these countries absolutely break-even type pricing. So whether it's drugs or vaccines, the poorest of the world, we are getting out the high-volume medicines to them. In fact, we go to the companies and we offer to take the risk, we do volume commitments, and we're constantly getting those prices down. We use competitive tenders, and so we've gotten companies from all over the world, including low-cost Indian manufacturers, to come in and get the prices down to the lowest level possible. And so you need to have a system where somebody's paying enough to fund the research, and the poorest in the world are getting it at just a break-even cost. And in fact, we do a yearly ranking of the pharmaceutical companies called the Access to Medicine Index that calls out the different programs of them. And in general, they've been moving up. The ones that are lower call us up, talk about how they can do better. So I'd say that's an industry that's very well behaved. Now, it doesn't mean that we've magically figured out exactly how to do the tiered pricing. If you knew somebody's income level, then you could do the right pricing, where I would pay the most and so on down the line. Right now, we largely use country boundaries as a proxy, where the poorest countries get a very low price, the richer countries get higher prices. That's imperfect in that if you're a poor person in a rich country, then you need the government to stand in for you with some sort of medical scheme. If you're a rich person in a poor country, maybe you get a better deal than you deserve. But by and large, the billions that are put into research are phenomenal. If we think about why will health be better 20 years from now, it's that profit, private sector innovation built on government-funded basic research. That combination has been absolutely phenomenal in advancing medical products.
There has been a tremendous amount of counterfeiting of medicines by poor countries or within poor countries to make medicines even cheaper. Is that legitimate?
Well, the term counterfeiting actually means making something that's inferior, and that is not good. Counterfeit means not the real thing. And in terms of being adulterated, not having enough, the reason we get drug resistance, particularly in the case of malaria, is people have made drugs that are only partially powerful enough, and so you develop resistance there. And so because the companies are willing to do this break-even type pricing, you really don't have to compromise. You can use the generics industry, the low-cost formulators, and you don't have to go to what would be called a counterfeit.
All right, we've got a lot of tricky questions in this area. Here's one from Roy Kwan.
Okay. Hello, Bill. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is separated into two entities. One to give money to charities and grants. The other is to invest assets to generate a profitable return. Problems can arise and may have already arisen when the goals of the two separate entities conflict with each other. For example, if the foundation invests in a for-profit organization which actually contributes to the very problems that the foundation has been set up to address. What controls have been put in place to prevent the foundation from investing in companies which undermine the underlying goal of the foundation? And has the foundation ever withdrawn investments into companies which actually contribute to the inequalities of the world?
Yeah, so as the questioner said, the assets of the foundation are invested in bonds and stocks. So we might own car companies or various things. We have various prohibitions. For example, we don't own tobacco companies. We don't own weapons companies. There's a list of companies that were involved in Sudan that a group got together, mostly universities and us, and decided, okay, that was a banned list that none of us would invest in. We spent a lot of time looking at the so-called proxies of the companies we own to see what sort of initiatives are on there. And sometimes we'll vote against management. There have been a few gay rights issues that we voted against management on. But we don't pretend that the nature of our investments, in and of themselves, that's the good we do for the world. So, for example, we've from time to time owned U.S. government bonds. It doesn't mean that we endorse, every soldier in the American Army's activities that day. We own car companies. That, we're not the ultimate court of justice. We simply buy investments that are properly and policed by governments, and then we do our good work through our donations. And so from time to time, a car company will do something wrong, or a bank might make a bad loan, or...
Well, you had this investigation by the LA Times in 2007, which was one of the darker moments in terms of publicity for the foundation.
I wouldn't say that.
Well, they suggested that you were investing millions...
They suggested they wrote a great article. Why did they suggest that?
They wrote
it was brilliant.
They wrote saying you're investing billions in Shell, in Exxon, in Chevron, in total, these oil companies which were blanketing the Niger Delta with pollution, while at the same time, and making children sick, they said, while at the same time you were doing your vaccine programs in the same area. And they said these two things contradicted each other. So did you actually change practices after that?
No, those oil companies are not out to make children sick, and nor is, whether we own 0.1% of them going to save any children's lives. So we're in a world of cause and effect. When we buy vaccines and get them out there, we're into saving lives. We're not into patting ourselves on the back that, oh, we don't own shares in that company. The most controversial thing we own are U.S. government bonds. I mean, I disagree with a lot of things the U.S. government does, and so how can I own their bonds? I've even owned Australian bonds. I mean, so no, I do not endorse every action of things that I own investments in, but nor are we the court of justice. We're not going to take our 1,000 people who are malaria experts, TB experts, and sit and go around and look at every oil company employee. I happen to know something about the Niger Delta situation that I don't blame them as actors at all, but the general point is that we're about our grants, and otherwise we're just a typical investor where the governments are setting the rules.
Okay, let's move on. Our next question is from Kashfia Rahman.
I hope my voice doesn't crack now. Mr. Gates, Dead Aid, book by Tambisa Moyo, illustrates that giving more aid in Africa over the course of the years did not elevate poverty. Instead, it kept the economy crippled, with governments asking for more aid. This flow made a cycle of aid giving, which resulted in nothing productive, and it has not been used to solve the immediate, nothing except solving the immediate problems, and the money is not being used to make businesses sustainable in Africa. What is the Foundation's view in this regard?
So there's obviously a question about whether aid in Africa has had negative consequences. There's been new analysis about that.
Well, it depends on your value system. Over the last 20 years, the number of children who die in Africa every year has been cut in half. And is that good or not good? It's largely due to vaccines and the aid programs that have been there in Africa. I think that that book actually did damage generosity of rich world countries. People have excused various cutbacks because of it.
You read the book, obviously. Did you?
Yes.
Did you find anything? Did you find anything in it of use?
I found that she didn't know much about aid and what aid was doing, and she is an aid critic. There's not many because it's moralistically a tough position to take, given what aid has been able to do. But if you look objectively at what aid has been able to do, you would never accuse it of creating dependency. Having children not die is not creating a dependency. Having children not be so sick they can't go to school, not having enough nutrition so their brains don't develop, that is not a dependency. That's an evil thing. And books like that they're promoting evil.
Okay, let's move on. Thank you. Our next question tonight comes from Professor Ian Fraser, whose research led to the development of the HPV vaccine against cervical cancer. Ian.
Mr. Gates, Our research and your supports for vaccines programs in the developing world have encouraged us to initiate a program to help prevent control cervical cancer in Vanuatu, a small Pacific island where cervical cancer happens to be the commonest cause of death amongst women. Vanuatu have committed to continue the program when our funding support for that program ceases. However, there's clearly an expectation that the funding will continue to come from outside of the country. Are we doing things wrong? Is it morally correct to support a program which we know is going to come to an end unless there's continued outside support? And how can we make Vanuatu more responsible for looking after itself?
Yeah, I think before you undertake a program, it is important to look at whether there'll be ongoing support for that. In the case of HPV vaccine, the good news is that Gavi is now supporting some pilot programs where they fund the availability of HPV vaccine. And with enough donor generosity, they'll be able to make that a standard, the same way they have for pentavalent, and they're doing for rotavirus and pneumococcus. In fact, the next big vaccine they want to add to that list as they get the universal coverage of those out there, HPV. And there's a lot of excitement. Now, it's tricky because you have to give it a different age than the normal vaccination program. But the pilot programs are to look at, can you do that through the schools? How do you get people together? We've done pilots in India, which was actually a good thing that we learned from. So I think there's some very good plans to bring the prices down and to have this Gavi financing come in for the countries that want to get serious about HPV, moving towards a goal that this should be universally available.
Briefly back to Ian, are you concerned that some forms of aid are creating dependency?
It's not so much that they create dependency as that they create an expectation in the population that is difficult then to meet. The Gavi price for the HPV vaccine is still $5 a dose, and in Vanuatu, which is not Gavi eligible because it does a lot of banking for Australia, but still has a subsistence economy, $5 a dose is quite a lot of money.
Yeah, I don't know the economics of Vanuatu, why they can't tax the banking activity to buy a $5 vaccine. It seems like you could do that, but the price won't stay at $5. The price, there are different manufacturers who are going to come in and bring it down. Sadly, the price will come down partly because penetration in rich world hasn't gone up as quickly as was hoped for. So there's still a lot of work to do on HPV, including getting those new entrants in that we are financing some of that.
Okay, let's move on. Our next question comes from Catherine Murray.
Mr. Gates, some of the world's poorest countries are run by corrupt and often totalitarian leaders. How do you manage to support the people without supporting the government?
Well, we believe that vaccination should take place in every country, no matter what you think of the leader in that country. The children in that country deserve vaccines. So we've even been involved in helping get vaccines into North Korea, which, it's a contest, but you might think of that as the worst political leadership in the world today. Not many would compete with that. And so we're involved in all countries. Somalia, where there is no government, Eritrea, where the government's imperfect, you name it, we're in there trying to get vaccines out to the children.
And places where the workers themselves have been in danger, if not some of them killed.
Well, yeah, it's very tragic that even in the case of polio, in the last 6 months, the workers have been targeted, both in Pakistan and in Nigeria, and killed. Now, the workers have chosen to keep volunteering. New security things have been put in place. The government's really taken some very good steps. But, those are real heroes that go out and get vaccines to children, even in the face of threats against their life.
Is this a particular issue with Islamist extremism in North Africa, which is becoming, and Pakistan, obviously, which is becoming a lot worse?
Well, there's a group in Nigeria called Boko Haram, and what they think about this isn't totally clear. In the case of Pakistan and Afghanistan, we've actually had good luck where a lot of the Taliban groups have given so-called letters of passage where they say vaccinators can come in. They need to be convinced that it's not a plot by the U.S. government, and there were some things that confused that in terms of vaccination activities. And so maintaining that fragile trust that these people are there to help your kids and that's all they're going to do, it's never very easy, but it's actually looking pretty good right now in Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Okay, let's move on again. We'll talk about something that's more fun. Our next question comes from Philippe Zander.
Firstly, on behalf of the International Health staff and students here today, we'd like to thank you for coming. My question is, since putting forward the Condom Challenge, in which you are offering $100,000 startup funding to whoever creates a new condom that can protect and increase sexual pleasure, have there been any designs that are fulfilling expectations? And how significant of an effect do you think the new condom might have in decreasing rates of HIV and sexually transmissible infections across the globe, particularly the developing nations?
Yeah, we put out some pretty interesting challenges. And I don't know the status on that one. I think people are still sending in their things. What we do is we ask you to send in, we have new toilets, ways of delivering vaccines, all sorts of places where we're seeking the best ideas. And we ask people to send in a 2-page application. And in order to avoid committee thinking, we send them out to reviewers, and usually you'll get about 20. Whichever one you think is the best, that gets funded, no matter what any of the other reviewers think. And then you pick your 3 next ones, and then if that's from a poor country, it's automatically funded. Or if it's from a rich country, it takes 3 people to give it their second designation. So anyway, we've been able to finance a lot of pretty wild ideas.
How close are you to producing a better condom which produces
I don't know.
More pleasure?
I'll have them get back to you on that.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Sam Wood.
Mr. Gates, a topic that has not yet been broached tonight, but is nevertheless one that's quite important for our world at the moment, is the one of our environment. And you've said in the past that in order to stop global temperature rise, we must cut our total carbon footprint globally to 0, which would mean those in the third world must do so as well. How do you propose to cut the carbon footprint of those who already have the bare minimum in terms of industrial technology, which even now is not enough to properly sustain them?
Well, the key is not the CO2 emissions of the third world. If you think of the poorest countries, they're responsible for less than 5% of the carbon emission. And when I say the poorest, I don't mean the middle income. I don't mean Brazil, Mexico, China, Indonesia. I mean the 70 that are the very poorest. And so for them, it's such a small percentage that they should not have imposed upon them that they have to buy more expensive energy. They are the ones who will suffer the most, because it's actually tropical agricultural environments where the heating will cause the most starvation because of extreme crop failure. And so it's incumbent on the rest of the world to get CO2 emissions down. And it's a very urgent thing that requires us to fund innovation, to fund incentives. It's not an immediate problem, but it's a huge problem that you've got to act now to make a big difference.
There is a global fund, although it's running out of money, for health issues. Should there be a global fund for environmental issues to actually help this process?
I don't think a new mechanism is what's required. The thing you want to do that has the longest lead time is you want to increase research in energy R&D. And it's very disappointing that as people have taken money and subsidized various things, that the research on things that would be very economical hasn't increased. Even the US, if you look at the balance of research, and they're by far the biggest funder of energy research, like many other categories, the amount of deployment money has been almost 10 times the research money, and the research has not gone up much. So I'm not sure a new mechanism is what's required.
Okay, let's move on. We have another question. It's from Amy Kimball.
Given that your charity focuses on providing better health for citizens in foreign countries, does it frustrate you that underprivileged citizens in the United States don't have access to an affordable healthcare system?
Yeah, well, fortunately, in the US, less than 1% of children under 5 die, and that's largely, to the degree it happens, because of a premature birth. And so although we have a very inequitable situation, and we should certainly move towards universal health care, it's not really comparable to the situation in developing countries. That is, most kids get enough nutrition that you don't have this 30 to 40% where their brains don't fully develop. So we have work to do as a country. We're kind of unique in the rich countries in terms of healthcare accessibility. We'd get the worst grade of all the different countries. We also manage to spend more than anybody else, so copying us may not be the best idea in this one area. But I do think the policies are moving in the right direction to give better health care. In fact, even for young people, the CHIPS coverage has gone up, and the new Obamacare thing will help with that quite a bit.
I was going to say, did you get involved in politics to this degree that Obamacare was hugely controversial? The Tea Party candidates basically said this is going to destroy the American economy and certainly the American health system. Did you get involved in politics then?
Well, I think if you're a rich person with a lot of ideas, you ought to be careful to pick a few ideas to kind of say that you know the answer. People get tired of listening to you if you think you have answers to too many things. And so the areas that I really have experience are issues related to education, issues related to foreign aid. And so although there are exceptions, I really, when I'm back in Congress, I try to talk to things that I'm working on full time. I know the scientists, I know the numbers, and rich world healthcare is different enough than what I've devoted my life to that I don't go in pretending to have the solution on that.
Okay, our next question is from Ben Park.
The Australian Indigenous population have a lower life expectancy of about 10 years compared to non-Indigenous Australians. This can be attributed to the disadvantages they face in areas of health, education and employment. These combined factors have led to an intergenerational cycle of disadvantage for Indigenous people. How do you see the best way to break this cycle of disadvantage?
Well, you should, it's interesting to think, are there countries who, for their Indigenous population, has done a good job? It's another case where I wouldn't say the US has done a particularly good job. We have some strange things where we let them build casinos in some cases, and then they have so much money, they have the problems of having too much money. And that doesn't work very broadly because the vast population of Indigenous people aren't in those weird privileged circumstances. So, bringing them into a modern culture that requires certain things, having them retain their traditional values, those seem to create a bit of a paradox. I don't know examples, but you should study and say, did New Zealand do it well? Did parts of Europe do it well? Are there any examples of this? Certainly it's a worthy cause in terms of resources, creativity, smart people. Are the schools fantastic in those areas? Why is the healthcare not living up? What are the diseases that are at work there? What you're describing in terms of life expectancy, 10 years is a lot. For a lot of countries, it's more like 40 years or 50 years different, but clearly that should be worked on.
Let's move on. You're watching a special edition of Q&A with Bill Gates. Our next question comes from Arian Jahiri.
In an episode of The Simpsons, a character made the following quote about the future when addressing cadets. The wars of the future will not be fought on the battlefield or at sea. They will be fought in space or possibly on top of a very tall mountain. In either case, most of the actual fighting will be done by small robots. And as you go forth today, remember always your duty is clear, to build and maintain those robots. While such a quote is supposed to be satirical, do you think one day robots doing human tasks such as fighting wars will become reality?
Well, we already have the equivalent of robots doing a lot of things. If you look at how farming was done historically and how it's done today, those are mechanical devices that are helping us out a lot. If you look at what a telephone operator used to do or what a typist used to do, we are proceeding to replace all sorts of rote labor with robots. And this is a progression that with vision, with speech recognition, with greater mobility, will span to a lot of new areas And
including warfare, which I think is the point that that young man just made. And indeed, we have drones already, these robots flying over different countries, assassinating people. The future, according to futurologists who look at robotics, could be of tiny swarms, insect-sized drones able to infiltrate people's houses and kill them. And do you think about the future? Do you think about these kind of things, how it might look?
Well, today we have real insects invading people's homes. It's called malaria, and it actually does kill people. So I have a strange obsession with the present. I don't see robots as something that will lead to more war. We have to be careful to avoid war. In general, the trend has been quite phenomenal in that regard. Violence in general, particularly of that type, less genocide. There's an unbelievable book about this by Steven Pinker that really talks about the trend and how positive it's been. But robots are a good thing. Let's just use them for something other than war.
Next question is related to that. It comes from Jessica Lee.
Do you ever think that artificial intelligence will ever surpass the human mind? And if so, how would humanity handle it?
Well, it'd be very humbling. In certain respects, computers are far faster than we are today. Multiplying, perfect memory. And it's this wonderful auxiliary tool that lets us communicate and create the ability to simulate things. Try out a new car design and see how that's going to work, or a new nuclear reactor, look at how you would design drugs. Computer simulation is this mind-blowing advance that will increase the rate of innovation. And so, I do think that when the computer takes over certain tasks, that'll be tough for us. It will be a long time before you're matching the type of broad judgment that humans exercise in many different areas.
When you were younger, you predicted this could happen, that carbon-based life forms might not be unique.
Yeah, over time, the machines are going to get very smart. And like all modern things, we'll have to adjust to that. It's kind of an embarrassment of riches problem as opposed to the opposite that many people worry about in the future. And so I do believe it's a solvable problem. Now we have to avoid climate change and other problems before we'll even have this one to worry about.
Sure, but do you think artificial intelligence is doable?
Absolutely.
And how long do you think that could take?
Very hard to predict. At least 5 times as long as Ray Kurzweil says.
Okay, the next question is from Tobias Yao.
Hi, Bill. Thank you for answering my question. My question is, I was hoping to get your view on the constant use of smart devices by young people, excluding Microsoft products, of course. And how do you teach your kids?
Well, in terms of using, when does a kid get a phone, every parent has to make that judgment. When does a kid get to browse without you seeing their browsing history? That's something you can talk with your kids about, make a decision. Do your kids get to go into their rooms and Skype with anyone in any way? Actually, in our household, they are allowed to do that, but there's all these different judgment calls. The main thing that comes off is a kid is overusing the technology, some game or something like that. And actually, for our kids, they haven't gotten to the point where we've had to set limits on it. Now, they all said that every single classmate had phones years before we let them have phones. And we said that was good experience for them to go through. So, we're viewed as tough parents in terms of letting the kids have stuff at a young age. And then you teach them how to use it well and, expect them to use it responsibly like anything else.
Not surprisingly, there's a bit of curiosity about your family and how that works. Zach Solomon has a question for us.
You say you don't think it's a good thing for your children to have too much money. You're only giving them a small portion of your fortune, a paltry $10 million. That amount would be life-changing for most. Do you think that your sense of perspective has been skewed by your wealth?
Absolutely. I haven't mowed the lawn for a long time. I forget what it's like. I do wash the dishes every night, so there are certain rituals that are worth maintaining. What you'd like to do is have your kids have some freedom to pick what they want to do, but not so much freedom that they can't do something of importance. And that's a hard balance to strike. But I do think that having kids receive large sums of wealth actually has been more negative for them than positive, particularly if their friends think that, they think that. I think a kid should grow up knowing that they're going to have to make their own way in terms of finding work, and that they won't be giving out sums of money or just have all the money they'll need. And so far that philosophy has worked very well.
I presume you have heard of that robot called the dishwasher. Just doesn't matter. The next question is from Andrew Asfaganov.
Mr. Gates, information technology is becoming very integrated deeply into our lives and brings new levels of convenience at the cost of privacy. Does it worry you that this technology will be misused in the future in terms of controlling human activity?
Yeah, as technology advances, there are things like privacy, which we've sort of had implicitly because people weren't very good at gathering information, where society will have to think more explicitly about what are the rules. If you've had a divorce trial, is that transcript generally available? If you've had tickets, should your neighbor be able to find out that you had a speeding ticket? If somebody's going to hire you as a bus driver, should they be able to find out you had a speeding ticket? What should your credit card company know? How far back should that go? And these are complex questions. We'll have to make sure that they're obeyed and that the tools work that way. Even questions like, should there be lots of cameras in an urban area? London's chosen to go in a direction where they have lots of cameras. It's actually worked very well for them in terms of stopping crime and improving things. Other cities, including some in the US, have been more reluctant to deploy that technology. And so it is one of the drawbacks against an overwhelming set of positive things in terms of staying in touch, learning, curiosity. Privacy is one of the things we're going to have to make sure we draw the line in the right way. And I think different countries will experiment with different ways of drawing it. When you get terrorists using the technology, you'll tend to say, okay, the state should be able to see a lot. Then when you get periods where that's not happening, then you'll tend to move towards individual privacy. And hopefully we can find a way that we achieve both.
You've got time for one last question. This one comes from Andrew Zhang.
Hi, Bill. It's a great pleasure to meet you. What are your thoughts on cryonics? Is it something you have personally considered? As a few months ago on Reddit, you mentioned that cheating death is on your bucket list, and you're probably the most viable candidate to beat death.
Cheating death is on your bucket list, is that true?
No, I'd like to live a long time, but I won't have myself cryogenically preserved or cloned or anything of the kind. Life is a great thing, but you got to make room for the people who come after you. So I won't try and cheat death. Just delay it as long as possible.
Well, thank you very much for this hour of your life. That is all we have time for. Please thank our guest, Bill Gates. Thank you. Thank you very much. And a special thanks to the Pacific Friends of the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis and Malaria, and everyone here at the University of New South Wales, including this great audience. Give yourselves a round of applause. You were terrific. Please join us next Monday for another Q&A in our regular 9:30 time slot. Until then, good night.